Welcome, everybody. We're at Book City with Carmen Maria Machado, and thank you, Carmen, for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
So we will talk about Carmen's books that were both translated in Italy by Codice Edizioni. Her Body and Other Parties, Il suo corpo e altre feste, and in the Dream House, Nella casa dei sogni, there is more a memoir, the most recent one. So I would like to ask you to start by asking you about this short story collection, Her Body and Other Parties, that was what made many people discover your work. You had published some of these short stories already, but there's one in particular that I think it's really relevant today, which is Inventory, because this story is, an inventory of love stories, but it's set on the background. There's a pandemic in the background of all of this, and of course this was written before everything that we have seen. So I wanted to ask you a little bit about how this story was started and the idea of this pandemic on the background and not in the center of the story, and what it felt like now to find yourself in the middle of one.
Yeah, well, it was funny because initially what the way I sort of went into the story was thinking about if there was a way for me to use a sex scene as like a unit of measurement in a story. So I was like, what if I wrote a story where each scene is a scene of intimacy with another person? And so I had this idea, and then eventually I was like, well, it's not enough that it needs like something else to kind of make it go. Like that's just like a piece of it. And so I was like, oh, what if there's a pandemic in the background? I was thinking a lot about this film that I really love called Children of Men, which is a film about a pandemic in which women stop having children. That's set in the near future, and it's like this very beautiful film. Also, it's a novel, and there's things happening in the foreground, like very personal stories, but also in the background it's this like catastrophic thing. And so I became very interested in thinking about what does it mean to like be living your dumb little life, like making breakfast and going to work and feeding your dog and trying to hook up with people, but like also in the background there's something completely sort of incomprehensibly huge and terrible happening, which is in a way is like how we live our lives. Like at every moment we're living our dumb little lives while there's like all kinds of big bad stuff happening around us, and that's just like the human experience. So that just became like the story I decided to write. And it was weirdly prescient. And when COVID started, people were like, how did you know? And I was like, well, we were due for a pandemic, weren't we? And I think, and of course, like people want to be together and it's hard to be apart. And so even just on that level, like, the story of like, it's getting worse and worse because people won't stay apart from each other is like also true of COVID. Right. And so, it ended up being this like weird, this like weird thing that just, felt like I predicted something.
Yeah. And in this book, there is an exploration of love and sex and the discovery, especially of the body when you're a teenager, for teenagers. And there's relationships between men and women, and among women, and and there's motherhood too. And I wanted to ask you, how this exploration, why this exploration was important for you, because you're also one of the most recognizable voices now in as a queer author. Of course, it's interesting to for me to see how you explored all sorts of sexuality and identity, and I wanted you to talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, well, there was a point early in my career. I mean, when I was in grad school, so even like before my career, it wasn't a career at all. I was just going to school. And I was thinking a lot about, this idea that I talk about, which is voice, like literary voice. What does it mean to have a voice in writing? And I basically what I figured out is that like, it was like what I wanted to say and like how I wanted to say it. So at some point I realized like, okay, like I'm really interested in these themes of bodies and sexuality and uh, gender and all these subjects. And I want to write about them in some capacity. And I also want to do it using sort of tools of genre. So thinking about horror or science fiction or fantasy or fan fiction or whatever, and so and that became like the voice that became my own, where it was like, and also, also like the prose, the way I write my prose, et cetera, et cetera. There's like all these different ways to do it. But yeah, like, and that just became the voice that I sort of found. And then when I had it, it felt right. Like I was like, oh, I feel like I actually like am making something now, which I hadn't really felt before. So yeah.
And there's another story that shows your love for Law and Order, of course. That we're not talking about. And also in that story, the body is a mutilated body many times. So how does this connect with the rest of it? There's always this theme in your writing, right? This dark side of it that has to do with psychology, but also with our bodies too.
Yeah. Well, I think for me, I think if you exist in the world as a queer person, a woman, a person of color, a trans person, like anybody, a person with, a disabled person, when you exist in these spaces where like your body is sort of inherently politicizes you, right? And you're sort of always in this like sort of fraught situation where you exist in like a liminal space. And I think that experience like translates really well to like the genres that I'm interested in. So like there's again these ideas of horror, especially. So like, right. So in especially Heinous, which is this like weird story I wrote about Law and Order SVU, like I was thinking, I actually don't know what the Italian title is, if it's the same title, but yeah, but I was really interested in this question of all of that in the context of horror and also in the context of horror and the context of like detective narratives, police narratives, procedurals, sort of as a concept. So it just kind of like, they all kind of like came together in this really beautiful way, and I was able to explore these ideas.
Yeah. Then going to your memoir, that is that is a story of your relationship with a previous partner and the abuse in a queer relationship, which is, as you explain in the book and you've explained in interviews, it's an especially difficult subject to address because it's been so often ignored and not understood, even by people who are involved in it. And in a way, prejudice has to do with that. Could you explain why?
Yeah, well, I think that there's obviously, when it comes to questions of, say, domestic or intimate partner abuse or domestic violence in relationships in general, and in queer relationships specifically, that there is a pressure to deny the existence of those ideas because queer people are fighting for, they're fighting for something, right? And so I know that I don't know where things are now, but I was in Italy this summer and I was sort of following about the hate crimes sort of discussion that was happening about like this, and I think that like when you have a group of people whose humanity and whose safety and bodies are being sort of debated in this very public way, when that happens, people feel pressured to present the best face possible, right? And they say like, we deserve these things because we are not just that we're human beings, because we're like good, we're better, we're best, right? And so it's homophobia that then creates this backlash, but then that creates like a situation where you can't be honest if you're like somebody who's like in an abusive lesbian relationship, for example, that it's like harder to talk about, and like we don't have the language or like the sort of the cultural references to sort of articulate that. So it's like weird because obviously it's a problem within the community, but ultimately I think a lot of it comes from homophobia and this desire to like put on a good face for other people, ultimately so that you can like survive, which is hard, which is like it's like a very weird dynamic, but.
Yeah, it's also the idea that in order to be accepted, you have to be better than anybody else.
Precisely.
And so you cannot, there cannot be a bad person in the community or a bad, because it will not just bring a negative judgment on you, but on your all, on the whole movement, on everything that you conquered. So it's a huge responsibility on an individual, basically. Yeah. Another thing I wanted to ask you is has to do with the debate there has been recently, and with lots of misunderstandings and protests that has involved personality of the literary world and LGBTQ rights. I don't know if you've paid attention to this. With David Chappelle, for instance, had this The Closer, this Netflix series that was accused of being transphobic, and there have been protests from within the Netflix employees, but also authors like Joyce Carol Oates. A few days ago wrote something about they and them, right? I don't know if you read that.
No, I didn't. I'm not on Twitter anymore, so I am like blessedly unaware, but I did hear, like, I think I heard like a third hand about that.
Okay. She apologized. She basically said, in this tweet, she just said something like, I don't think that the use of they, them will become mainstream because it's too complicated. There has to be a single, plural, and stuff. And then, there was this debate, and and then she later apologized. But this is happening more and more. And since you are both a writer and a member of the community, I just want to ask you, what is going on?
What is going on? I mean, I don't know what's going on. Everyone you have mentioned is like old. Which is not to say, I should clarify, it's not to say that there aren't like young transphobic or homophobic people, like there are, but I also I don't know,
there's a generational thing for sure.
There's definitely absolutely, there's absolutely a generational thing. And I think also I don't know, it's like Joyce Carol Oates can believe whatever she wants or say whatever she wants, but also she will get left behind. Do you know what I mean? Dave Chappelle is the same. Obviously, I don't want to be cavalier. Obviously the Dave Chappelle thing is really ugly and really horrifying. And I think, corporations at some point, I feel these are also separate, because I feel like with Netflix, it's also about the money that's being given. You know what I mean? There's a financial piece of it. Joyce Carol Oates, I don't know. She says a lot of really terrible shit all the time. When I was still on Twitter, I just blocked it out because I couldn't deal with it. I was just whatever. And Dave Chappelle, yeah, I think that people, calling Netflix to task is the appropriate response. And I think, he's an old, out of touch transphobe, and that's what he is. I don't, there's something else to be, I don't know what else there is to say about it.
So, this shows the difficulty in, different movements, but also in kind of working together, but also of writers and intellectuals and people, who, do you think it's mostly a generational thing in the end, or is it kind of the result of the way, I don't know, American society is today? Can we read something bigger in this?
Yeah, right. I think it's partially generational, though I should be clear that there are a lot of very public transphobic people who are my age. It's not, I don't think it's entirely an issue of age. And there are obviously older people who are not transphobic. But I think there is a part of it. And I think our understanding of gender, also just the existence of when I was a teenager, we barely talked about people being gay, and like definitely never talked about gender fluidity or transness or non-binary, like we never talked about that. Like I had no frame of reference for that at all. So I think like obviously there are people who are like, oh, I never had to think about this, like you know. But I also think like people need. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
No.
Oh, was that you? Oh, sorry. I thought you were about to speak. Sorry.
No.
But yeah, I mean, so I think it's partially generational, but also just like, you know, I think some people, unfortunately, the existence of social media means that you get to see everyone's every thought, like when they have it, which is like also historically not a thing that used to happen, you know? So like, I feel like there's like a lot of like things at play that are partially technology and partially generational and partially cultural and partially like, I mean, yeah, intellectuals have always argued over all kinds of like cultural sort of touch points, and some have been right and some have been wrong. And like, you know, that I think that continues. I don't think that's like a new idea.
Yeah.
Like I think people have always argued in those ways, and
Yeah.
you know, it sort of just is what it is.
Yeah, and I think that around gender, and this is a huge debate of our time. And I think that, I mean, for instance, people who are, I don't know, Margaret Atwood herself, she retweeted something that some other woman had written. Of course, I mean, I don't want to go on this because I think
wait, sorry, what did she, again, I'm not on Twitter, so I'm like.
Yeah. She retweeted an article that was basically wondering whether the word woman is endangered now, because you cannot say woman, you have to say person with menstruations, and you have like, there's, I mean, I will send it to you, but
no, I understand what you're saying. Yeah.
Sparked outrage from the you know, from people on Twitter, and you know, so but these things keep happening. And I think that they are also a little bit different from one another, because one is a Netflix show, another thing is a comment that, you know, I think it was probably Oates' comment was probably taken out of context. She was talking from a linguistic point of view. I mean, it's another person retweets an article that didn't write without a comment. So, I mean, how much has she embraced it or not? I mean, it's right. But it is an issue of debate. So it was interesting for me to ask you about it. But I would like to ask you another, like you were recently in Italy, and you know, when you were here, I read this article that you published about the meaning of reading and the meaning of writing. And I wanted to ask you about that too, because especially since the festival Book City this year is about the after, you know, after the pandemic, we're kind of brought to, you know, to ask ourselves, what is the meaning of writing? But it was interesting to me that as a writer, you were asking what is the meaning of reading, and it's not, you said, just for empathy, as many people think. Would you like to tell us a little bit about that?
Well, I think if I'm like trying to remember my own piece that I wrote. I mean, I think what I was sort of arguing is like the reason we have to protect reading as an act is because it actually isn't about it. I mean, people make this argument that like reading makes people empathetic, but also I don't think that's enough. Like, I don't think that it's enough for just to create empathy. I think the acts of reading and writing are worth preserving because they are about the expansion of human consciousness, which is like the reason that we are here, or I'd like to think as the reason we're here. And so that idea is like very interesting to me. And I'm really, like, I think that those things are worth preserving for that precise reason. Not even because I feel like empathy, it's like, it makes it so external. It's like, what if it's just to like make ourselves better as people? Like, what if it's about understanding our own minds in a far more interesting and profound way? Like, that seems like enough to me, and seems worth protecting.
Yeah. I would like to ask you a little bit about, you know, about the body in terms of also you as a person, not just as a writer who writes about the body a lot. Then I read in The Guardian some time ago this article in which you explained how you came to see your body in dresses in different way, like fashion, and how important was that in shaping your identity. And I wanted to ask you if that's still the case, and at which point you are, because you started discovering it, right? It was a kind of process.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm a person who, I mean, I'm fat, and I have been for a very long time. And there were many years of my life where I did not know how to dress myself properly. I didn't know how to present myself, and no one gave me those tools. And it was like really hard to just like buy a suit or buy a dress. Like everything was very weirdly complicated. And and at some point I began this journey of like learning how to dress myself, learning how to shop properly, learning how to like make myself feel good in my body. And I think, that journey is obviously ongoing, and it's like in the scheme of like fat politics is actually fairly low on the importance level. I mean, I think there's like way more important stuff that is worth sort of talking about in this way. But also for me, it was really helpful. And I think also was helpful in me sort of articulating something about gender. Like there's just like a lot of stuff kind of oh my God, excuse me. Oh, sorry. It's the end of the day here. I am really tired.
We're on different time schedules. So.
I know, no. But yeah, so I mean, I think for me, it's like a really rich place of exploration, and I love clothes, and I think that as a way of thinking about the body or having a relationship with the body, fashion is like one sort of beautiful axis, I guess, that I appreciate.
What are you working on now?
I am working on a couple of things. I'm working on a screenplay, which I can't really talk about, but I am, writing for TV, and I'm also doing a new book right now, which a fiction book. No more nonfiction for me. I'm done with the memoirs. It's only fiction from here on out. So
that was extremely hard, that memoir for you. I remember that when we talked about it, you had just published in Italy, and you told me if I had to, probably I wouldn't do it again, because it was really, really hard to go through your own story and revisit it through that book, even though the way you write, you mix essay and personal, but it was very personal. And so
no more.
You're never going to do that anymore.
Nope.
All right. Well, I want to thank you for being so frank with us about talking both about literature and about, what is going on, and your decision not to be on social media anymore.
Best decision I ever made. Perfect. Absolutely perfect. So good. So good. I am so excited to not be on Twitter anymore. It's terrible.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Carmen. And we look forward to reading you again in the next book in Italy as well.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Bye.